Hi, I'm Ann Carter.
And I'm Pastor Richard Stadler.
And today we are talking about the texts for the sixth Sunday after Epiphany. And they are the Old Testament lesson of Deuteronomy 30, 15 through 20, the New Testament epistle, 1 Corinthians 3, verses 1 through 9, and the Gospel, Matthew 5, verses 21 through 37. We are moving our way through the Sermon on the Mount.
A reading from Deuteronomy. See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil, in that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to keep his commandments, his statutes, and his judgments, that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land which you go to possess. But if your heart turns away, so that you do not hear and are drawn away, and worship other gods and serve them, I announce to you today that you shall surely perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to go in and possess. I call heaven and earth as witnesses today against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore choose life, that both you and your descendants may live, that you may love the Lord your God, that you may obey his voice, and that you may cling to him, for he is your life and the length of your days, and that you may dwell in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give them.
I wrote down on the top of my sheet that choices matter.
Yes. And God is giving them a choice.
God is giving them a choice.
Choose life rather than death. Mm-hmm. If you choose obedience to me and you follow my commandments, then you're choosing the way of life. Mm-hmm. But if you worship other gods and you disobey me, then you're choosing death, and you're choosing to forfeit all the blessings that I've given you in the promised land. Mm-hmm. I think it's a real basic text. But what I find also interesting in the text is that there is a history of Israel that follows this giving of warnings to the children of Israel by Moses that shows they didn't do what he warned them to do. Mm-hmm. He said, you will have this land, it'll be yours if you do obedience to God and if you are faithful to me and do not worship other gods. But the history of Israel shows that they did commit idolatry and they did disobey him. And so he had every right to vomit them out of the land the way he says he's going to vomit the Canaanites out of the land to make room for them. And so then we read the Bible and we find out they're still in the promised land after they've committed all this idolatry. And they're down to the time of the monarchy and the time of the divided kingdom. They're still in the land, even though they have forfeited the right to it by being disobedient. And that's a wonderful implied message that the reason they're in the promised land is solely by the grace of God. Mm-hmm. Undeserved, yeah.
That he gave it to them because he wanted them to have it, and he is patient.
Right.
And he will keep them there.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And they have to have the humility to recognize mm-hmm. that, right? And, mm-hmm. and it's like what we've been hearing about being walking humbly with your God mm-hmm. from Micah, that this keeps kind of recycling itself in different forms mm-hmm. in these expressions. Mm-hmm. I once heard a distinction between justice, mercy, and grace that I think people who are listening to these texts and the future texts that we're going to be looking at can use as a tool to distinguish what is the text talking about. Is it talking about justice, mercy, or is it grace? Justice is getting what you deserve. Okay. Mercy is not getting what you deserve. Okay. Grace is getting what you don't deserve. And so the fact that the people were able to still keep living in the land after their disobedience and their idolatry, to me is an evidence of both God's mercy and his grace. Because if he had given them justice, he would have driven them out of the land because they had forfeited the right to it. Mm-hmm. And so when we look at the other readings today, maybe we can look for those same qualities and ask ourselves, okay, what's he talking about? Justice, mercy, or grace in this text?
Mm-hmm. 1 Corinthians... We haven't talked much about the book of 1 Corinthians.
No.
And we have been in the book of 1 Corinthians for several weeks now.
Right.
And so I would like for us just to give an overview quickly, if we can, of what the book of 1 Corinthians was. First of all, it's in the New Testament. Right. And it is an epistle. Right. And an epistle is simply a letter that was written to a congregation. Right. It was written by Paul. Right. It was written in the first century. Right. It was written to the congregation in the city of Corinth. Right. Corinth is a city in Greece. It is on the isthmus, which connects the mainland of Greece to the Peloponnesus, the three fingers of the Peloponnesus.
Right.
It is a city that was large in the first century. It was a seafaring port, which meant that it had all sorts of the vileness of the planet in its midst. There were a lot of sailors, a lot of merchants, a lot of prostitutes, a lot of interesting activity, and a lot of nationalities speaking different languages, trying to get along.
Right.
So as we go through the book of Corinthians over these next weeks, those kinds of themes also will come out, I think, of communicating with different kinds of people and different kinds of preachers and bringing it all back to worshiping Jesus Christ.
And the Christians in Corinth were living in an environment that was not what you would call friendly to Christianity and to Christian morality or Jewish morality for that matter. And so that's a challenge that we face today in our culture. And so many of the warnings that Paul is going to offer us as we read our way through Corinthians are very contemporary to the kinds of challenges that we face, even though the specifics may be different. What do you say?
A reading from 1 Corinthians. And I, brethren, could not speak to you as to spiritual people, but as to carnal, as to babes in Christ. I fed you with milk, and not with solid food, for until now you were not able to receive it. And even now you are still not able, for you are still carnal. For where there are enemy, strife, and divisions among you, are you not carnal and behaving like mere men? For when one says, I am of Paul, and another, I am of Apollos, are you not carnal? Who then is Paul, and who is Apollos? But ministers through whom you believed, as the Lord gave to each one. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither he who plants is anything, nor he who waters, but God who gives the increase. Now he who plants and he who waters are one, and each one will receive his own reward according to his labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field. You are God's building.
What do you see now in this little snippet?
Yeah, it is. It's a little
3?
snippet. I looked at it. He said, I fed you with milk, not solid food, because you were not ready. We are any of us really on solid food yet? As we grow in our Christianity, we get small bits, and we can take them in, and each layer gets built upon another. And then as we grow, as we assume, as we learn, then we can build on what we've already had. And sometimes it takes, as he said, different teachers, Apollos and Paul, different teachers coming in and teaching us different things.
Well, and he says, even now that I'm writing, you're still not ready for the mature stuff. And so maybe that's a reminder to all of us that as sophisticated as we become as Christians and our Bible knowledge and so on, that we always have to make sure that we go back to the basics and square one and start with the grace of God and with what Jesus has done for us, so that we always have our foundation secure in that as we do become more mature. But he certainly is giving evidence of their immaturity in their Christian life because of the strife they were having and the jealousy that they were experiencing and the factions and the cliques that they were experiencing. And we've talked about that before with his letter to the Corinthians. And so he's certainly reminding the Corinthians that there's a connection between what he's writing to them and what we've just seen in the Old Testament, and that is that you have a choice to make. And you can choose to follow what God wants you to do, or you can follow your visceral nature, which is usually pretty ugly in most of us because we're sinner saints. Just reminds us that one plants, another waters, but the real person who produces the building of the church is God. He's the builder. That's how he ends this by saying this, you are God's field, God's building. No building builds itself. It's built by a contractor. And God is the master contractor, the master builder who builds his church. And so we who are bricks in that building, or living stones as Peter calls us, we didn't build the church. You and I don't build a church. No pastor builds his church. It's God who builds that church, as he uses that very imperfect pastor to communicate the perfect word of the gospel. And God does the work then through that.
If we are going back to fundamentals and we're going back to basics, I think that's a reasonable segue into the gospel.
Yes.
Because Jesus brings it right back to the basics with all of them.
A reading from Matthew. You have heard that it was said to those of old, You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, You fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly while you are on the way with him, lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hand you over to the officer, and you be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say to you, you will by no means get out of there till you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said to those of old, You shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. Furthermore, it has been said, Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Again you have heard that it was said to those of old, You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no be no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one.
Often, Jesus is represented as this almost a milquetoast. Just this nice guy, smiling out, sitting on the hillside. Peace, brother. That's not Jesus. That's not Jesus in this text.
No, what
he
he's
has
doing,
words to say.
Yeah, and he's ratcheting up the law.
Yeah.
And he is driving out the delusion that we can make ourselves righteous in the sight of God by our performance and by our behavior. I mean, he takes one law after another and takes the implied misunderstanding of that law and suddenly refines it, sharpens it. He says, do you think you haven't committed murder just because you haven't stabbed somebody in the chest and because you haven't bludgeoned somebody? If you so much as hated somebody or even called him a fool, you're in danger of hellfire. Who would have thought that that would make you a killer, you know, in God's definition? And then he says, you don't think you committed adultery because you haven't slept and had sex with your neighbor's wife? If you so much as had a lustful thought in your head, then you're already breaking the sixth commandment. You've committed adultery against that woman. And, of course, it can go the other way, too, from women to men. But I think a lot of people think that they have been keeping certain commandments, and Jesus is just stripping that delusion away from them. And he just goes on and talks about oaths and says, I know it's the habit of you folks to swear oaths by Jerusalem or by heaven or by earth or even by your own head. But if you're a person of integrity, you don't need to do that. To prove that you're telling the truth, you don't have to swear an oath. Just say yes or no, and that should do it. If you've portrayed that you are a person whose word can be taken, you know, and if not, all the swearing in the world isn't going to improve it.
If you are such a person that everybody expects you to lie, so you have to say this oath to prove to them that, no, this time I'm telling the truth, there's something wrong in the way you are living. It's not what God wants of you. It's not what he expects of you. You are making a choice that has consequences that he promised to you in Deuteronomy.
And he tells us that just say yes or no, anything more of this than this is evil.
Mm-hmm.
And it opens the door for evil. Mm-hmm. And so, we've got examples in the Bible of people who have sworn stupid oaths, like Jephthah, who said,
Mm-hmm.
Lord, if I win this battle, first thing that comes out of my house, I'll sacrifice to you. And he wins the battle, it comes home, and it's his daughter who comes out. What a horrible grief he had and the family had to face. But if he just said, Lord, help me with this battle,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll leave it in your hands, and forgot the oath, he would have had the same good result.
Mm-hmm.
But he opened the door for evil in his life by a frivolous oath,
Mm-hmm.
a stupid oath.
Yeah. He made it about him
Yeah.
instead of about God.
Exactly.
It was God's victory, not Jephthah's. God didn't owe anything
Right.
to Jephthah. God doesn't owe anything to anybody.
And I think Jesus also says something about divorce here that is
Mm-hmm.
important for us to recognize as modern Christians. He says, if you divorce your wife, which Deuteronomy 24:1 allows a man to do, if his wife is guilty of adultery. But she hasn't been guilty of adultery, says Jesus, then you're stigmatizing her as an adulteress, according to Deuteronomy 24:1. Now, there was a school of Phariseeism, the school of Hillel, that was much more permissive in terms of divorce. You could divorce your wife if she burnt the food or if she raised her voice at you in the street or for a number of other reasons. And so Jesus is really delivering a polemic against that teaching. And he says, no, because look at the unloving thing you're doing to this woman that you've married. You are giving people the impression that she has violated Deuteronomy 24:1 when she hasn't, and she hasn't been unfaithful. And if she does decide to get married to somebody later on, a lot of people are going to assume, oh, that's the guy she had adultery with. And so they finally hooked up. And that is not fair to him or to her, because you're stigmatizing him as an adulterer. And you're going to look like they're both committing adultery when they haven't committed adultery. And so he's really ratcheting up the law of love and saying, how loving are you?
Mm-hmm.
And he's taking away this delusion that a lot of people have. Well, I'm a great person, I'm kind and I'm helpful and so on. And he just ratchets up the law in order to kind of emphasize to us, if you're going to be acceptable to God, it's not enough to use a mediocre account of the law. You've got to take exactly what the law demands.
Mm-hmm.
And take the consequences. And that's what drives us to a despair over our own self-righteousness and look and receive with gratitude the righteousness that God imputes to us through Christ.
Mm-hmm. It is, none of our actions are without consequence.
That's right.
And especially when he talks about anger. If you're angry with your brother or your sister, okay, let's do the scenario. Let's walk it through. You're at work, your boss yells at you, he's angry with you. You come home, you yell at your wife. I yell at my husband. My spouse yells at the kids yell at each other. Pretty soon there is this chain reaction of anger, and unsatisfaction and discontent.
Mm-hmm.
And it all started with one that if you had held on to your anger, you would not have started this chain reaction. Whatever choice we make, we have to look out for how it affects somebody else. And the guy who decides that he's just going to divorce his wife and cause such a reaction that will permeate this village and the society. It's not about you. It's about God's people. It's about honoring God by honoring God's people. But you, again, as we talked about these last weeks, you can only do that and you can only know that if you are walking humbly with your God to know what he expects of you.
And the last thought that's worth looking at is that Jesus reminds us that if you have a gift you're going to bring to the altar and your brother has something against you, now that implies that he legitimately has something against you.
You did something to him.
And you need to repent of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to apologize to him. Leave your gift. Go resolve this conflict. And have the humility to repent and know that there's forgiveness for it and that God assures you of that because of his grace.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. good readings that should be very fun to listen to
Yes.
in church.
Mm-hmm.